There's all these different phases of your children's lives. And
Yep.
as parents, we're evolving with those different phases. If you're living in a constant stress cycle and feeling like you're burning the candle from both ends, I would imagine if you really tapped into it, you know that you're not doing well because physical symptoms are coming up, different things are starting to break down. But it is that courage piece, rejecting some of what society wants us to do. And so I think it's just whatever works for you and your family. And that's where you begin. You really have to drown out a lot of noise that's out there.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's been through and still going through the trenches of motherhood myself, I get it. Life gets busy, and sometimes your relationship takes a back seat. But guess what? You can feel like a couple while raising kids, and I'm here to help. Join me each week here as we dive into the messy but fulfilling world of marriage and motherhood. From navigating conflict to reigniting that spark, we're going to chat about it all. So, if you're juggling mom life with wife life, this podcast is for you. And hey, if you love what you hear, I'd be so grateful if you could rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Here's this week's episode. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I am so excited for the guest we have today because we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like we all think about, but we don't talk about enough, and that is our mental health, especially for those of us who have grown up from or by a generation, raised by a generation that didn't really focus too much on that. They were just going until they reached burnout. And therefore, we learned to do the same thing, to prioritize productivity and not so much our own well-being. So I'm really excited to dive into this with Christine here. Christine is a master certified life coach and also a young working parent to 3. Her coaching services and group programs help new moms and busy moms juggling work and raising a young family. She believes that at their core, moms want to be the best versions of themselves. She helps moms prioritize their well-being in motherhood so they can thrive. Thank you so much for being here, Christine.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited for our chat.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so let's get the listeners to get to know you a little bit more. Can you share with us where you live, how old your kids are, and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in a small town about 45 minutes south of Boston called Rentham, Massachusetts. I have 3 kids. My oldest is 7, my middle is 4, and my youngest is 1. And just like you introduced, I'm a master certified life coach. I help moms that are in the messy middle of life and career. They really struggle with prioritizing themselves and their needs. And I sort of help to create sort of micro steps to get them to really infiltrate that into their life without sort of overhauling their life. So I'm excited to be here.
I love that. So tell us more about what led you to become a working mom coach, one who helps moms thrive in life.
Yeah. So back in 2019, I burned out pretty bad. It was right around the time that my second was born, and I was working full time with an hour and a half commute from Boston at the time, and all my flexibility was removed from my employer. And so I was tasked with sort of commuting into Boston with 2 kids under 3, and I sort of really fell through the cracks with postpartum depression and anxiety, but I don't think I really got caught in that checklist that they have at your 6-week appointment. And I sort of knew that, if my employer wasn't going to sort of work with me on my needs, I needed to sort of dig myself out of this. And I just really started with like these small micro steps to sort of dig myself out of what I felt was I was utterly depleted and like a vacant soul, just trying to figure out how to manage having 2 kids, working full time, keeping my marriage alive, like all of these just different things that seemed really challenging day to day for me.
Yeah, so relatable. I went through something so similar, which is probably why we get along so well. Okay, so let's dive into this because this topic is really, really big and juicy, and we can get into all different kinds of directions. But to start us off, What was your experience with coming into awareness about mental health? I think that's important to establish here.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that really pops into my mind is actually not really having the acknowledgement of mental health. And like within my family, just sort of realizing after becoming a mom that how much I suppress on a daily basis. And there was one sort of like aha moment in my late 20s when I was doing therapy where like I actually learned and recognized that you could have more than one feeling at a time. Everything was really black and white for me. It was like either you're sad or you're happy, or you might not have many different feelings at once. And just realizing that I didn't really come from a background that sort of embraced having different feelings and how do you work through difficult feelings and painful experiences. So this essentially got cracked wide open when I became a mother.
Yeah. So, what was it like before you became a mother? Because when you become a mom, it really triggers you, and you can either crack under the pressure or step up to the challenge and be like, okay, this is not working. I need to figure out a way to get through this and not lose my shit every 5 seconds because of the pressures of, taking care of a home, taking care of the kids, taking care of yourself, taking care of your marriage, and all the other demands of family, friends, work, whatever. Right.
Right.
So, what was life like before you realized, like, oh shoot, there's like a whole new world that I'm not even acknowledging, I'm not even addressing, and I don't even have the tools to do that right now?
Yeah, I think I can sort of remember the period of time because what sort of happened was, you know, before having kids, I think it was like almost this like slow burn of something that was underneath where like mental health wasn't prioritized. And so it was sort of out there and I wasn't really doing anything with it as I sort of, was going to have children and think about what this was. Like the anxiety and the depression cranked up, but I think it was directly relational to, I was the middle child. I was the person in my family that was always worrying about my parents. And I think that because I'm one of three kids, where I was structured within my family, I defaulted into being that like pseudo therapist or person to take on all of the things that weren't processed from my mom and dad, even though they didn't probably know they were doing it. But if you don't process your mental and emotional health, it's got to go somewhere. And that's why I think a lot of people, they might blow up in the grocery store, they might have different people that they offload. So even prior to having kids, my journey has also been like, I'm an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. And I think a lot of this was related to my experience in childhood and just who I am in my family.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would, like you said, offload on significant others big time. I would give also a lot of grief towards my parents because I had all this energy and emotion built up and I just displaced it because I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't
Hmm.
taught how to manage my emotions, how to even understand them, healthy ways to express them,
Hmm.
which led to poor boundaries, right? It just spills over into so many areas that can create this domino effect on our own lives and our experience of life because we're not equipped to know, okay, oh, when I make this decision, it actually makes everything better. And when I do this, it makes this area better, right? It all builds up. But when we don't recognize that we need to do something or even how to do that thing and that it's even out there,
Right.
it can really feel like it's caving in on you and you're just feeling more and more under pressure until you implode, right? So, yeah,
Right.
I get it when people are out there and they just like, yeah, okay, you clearly need help,
Right.
right? But it's easy to just judge and be like, there's something wrong with her.
Right.
Like, why is
Right.
she doing that? Why is she losing it in public? Oh my gosh.
Right. And probably from our own growth, we've developed that awareness to step back and we see it from that compassionate and empathetic place. And then there's also this piece of how do you bring to light how to cope with what you've experienced around dealing with your mental health? Because there's that disconnect where you witnessed it and saw how it wasn't happening growing up.
Yeah, definitely. Which is a great segue to my next question, actually. How did your mom affect your perspective on mental health?
Yeah, I think it's almost like we're growing right now as we're witnessing our childhood. So it's like in
Mm-hmm.
the present, seeing what happened. And I honestly feel like, from my mom's perspective, like obviously our parents do the best they can within the knowledge and circumstances that they have. But I think they were like smattered with how do we look among all these other people, our family, our friends. And they were sort of tasked with this idea that you do have to do it all and you have to do it with pleasure and a happy face, and sort of the caretaking role and the obligation and the responsibilities were deeply embedded into how they live daily life, and the martyr way and self-sacrifice that, having seen that and having also witnessed that pretty much like every 3 to 6 months, I witnessed my mom having like severe burnout that attacked her physically. It would happen usually in sickness or cold sores or all these different things. And I'm only bringing that to light because I eventually had to look at that from like an objective piece to see that was then happening to me in my 20s. And it was something that I said, I really have to get this in check, because my symptoms of stress and overwhelm and burnout were manifesting in the same way that I saw her. And I knew that this
Mm.
was going to be part of my journey to link how my mental health and my well being was affecting just daily life, like
Yeah.
what you do for productivity. And I'll say it started in my 20s to start to like eke out some of that, but it really came to light in a huge way in those early postpartum days with each of my kids. I had to really get straight with almost not doing the things that maybe they did, like right after having a baby, and saying like, okay, I have to overhaul this so I really heal and take care of myself in the proper way.
Yeah, there's so much to unlearn, and you don't really know what it is until you face it, right? Until you're in that
Absolutely.
same situation where you recognize yourself in in what you've seen from your parents or your upbringing in general. And that phrase like keeping up with the Joneses, that came
Hmm.
from their generation, and they very much did live like that, right? Like, oh, we all got to get that white picket fence house. We
Hmm.
all have to have a home that looks so pristine, it looks like nobody lives in it, like a model home. But it's like, is it really that important? Can't we just all understand that we all are raising kids and it's gonna look like a hot mess sometimes because the way
Right.
kids play with toys, it's like a bomb went off in the in the
Exactly.
playroom. Like they just pick something up and throw it around like confetti. I don't know about you, but I often have pieces of Legos all over the
Yes.
house, and it's like you tell them to clean it up, and then 5 seconds later, it's back. It's like, what
Right.
happened?
Right. Little trails everywhere in the house.
Yeah, they're like professional mess makers. Like, I couldn't
Yep.
even make the same amount of mess if I tried to. It's just
Right.
like impressive, but in not a good way.
Exactly. Exactly. But we're sort of bringing to light like that's daily life. We aren't really like living in this secret paradigm anymore. Like everything is out there. And I think this next generation really wants to try to figure out a better path that is authentic to each of us and not about the perfectionism or the trying to show the world that everything is Instagrammable perfect and all of that. It's really unsustainable and it doesn't make you happy in the end.
No, it doesn't. I mean, there might be like a small subset of people that it actually makes them genuinely happy, but I would tend to agree. I've had to address that within myself, right?
Mhm.
Anytime someone's birthday is coming up and I'm like, okay, we'll just do a small gathering. It always evolves into something more than I originally intended because of the
Right.
pressure of like, oh, well, I want to make sure that they have a really great time and I want to make sure that it looks nice. And it's just like, whoa.
Right.
This is no longer about my kid anymore. This is no longer about my well-being anymore.
Right.
Time out, right? Like, let's scale
Mhm.
it back. We don't need to be doing this. We're inviting people who love us and they could care less.
Right.
So, like,
And
why are we doing this?
right, and I think there's this other critical piece that's being brought up of, like, the enoughness, and I
Yeah.
think that we're not actually dialed into the fact that modern day parenting today and what we have circumstances wise with, like, let's just even talk about like the childcare costs, the inflation, the non-existent village, that we can't really do the same things that our parents did 30 years ago, but yet we haven't evolved into shifting that mindset into what does work for today. I feel like there's even like a small subset of us that are rejecting this old way of thinking on, how it's supposed to look. I mean, in my
Yep.
eyes, it's just plain simple not sustainable. You can't do the same things that some parents were staying at home while working full time. They're different, they're completely different experiences, but that's the framework that a lot of us are holding, and then the guilt and all these other things come in because we haven't shifted.
Yeah, definitely. My idea of productivity is constantly being challenged by myself intentionally, but it is so hard, right? Because I did see my mom single handedly work full time, take care of us kids, take care of the house because my dad was just not he just did not grow up with that
Mhm.
expectation put on him as a partner. So he didn't
Mhm.
really understand how to be an equal partner and how to be there as a parent or a co parent, I should say, and as a spouse in the home. And so for me, I'm like, oh, my house needs to look spick and span and I need to work full time and da 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 da. But it's like, okay, well, let's look at the full picture here. What came along with that? A lot
Mhm.
of burnout, a lot of blow ups, a lot of kids feeling like they need to walk on eggshells to be around that person, and just a lot of uncertainty and instability mental health wise. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I have that idea of what it means to be a mom, a woman, a wife from my mom, but I have to also remind myself, do I want that other stuff to come along with it? And obviously the answer is no. Like, I don't want that. I do want a marriage that thrives. I want to be able to have fun with my spouse. I want to be able to have time to connect with my kids. I still struggle to like know how to genuinely freely play with my kids. Like, it has to be something structured or else I'm like, I don't know what to do with you because I didn't have that growing up, right? Like,
Mhm.
let's play tea. Like, okay, what are we doing? I need rules, right? I need
Right.
something to follow along.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And it's a battle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you're like bringing up so much around just like unraveling the growing process while simultaneously doing it and trying not to do what was from before.
Yeah.
It's huge amounts of work. And I think a lot of us carry that like built in nurture. I sort of did a test with my third child. Like, I'm seeing that my husband is perfectly capable of doing the nurture and bonding piece. And if I'm not there a lot and have work, it happens in a similar way. But it's like we hold these like stories and these beliefs that only the mother can do it, or whatever it might be. But it's like our lives are really busy today. Like, we don't have sort of simplicity like in our life unless you really go against the grain and try to like make that be your life and have focus and all of that. Technology has like sort of blown up how we view life and how we do life, and it's really hard to figure out your path of how you want to parent, how you want to be a spouse, and all of that. I think we're really detangling those layers, peeling back the onion, and it's hard work because we don't always get it right. And you're trying to do the best you can with your kids.
Yeah. It is hard work because it requires you to be intentional and mindful about what you're doing. Whereas the previous generation is just like, okay, well, let's look around us. What do we see on
Mhm.
TV? What do we see our friends doing? What do we see our neighbors doing? Let's just do that, right? Let's just follow along. Let's be all the same. But we're now realizing in this generation, all being the same does not work because we are not all the same. We have different capacities to do things. We can tolerate different amounts of stress. We like different things. We are skilled at different things. I love that we're putting more individuality back into ourselves. And that is also the hard part because it's like, it's so much easier to just be like, what do I need to do? Like, there's a manual out there. Let me just
Right.
follow it.
Right.
But instead, we're like, no, no, no. We have to like actually reflect about where we want to take our family as a family unit. We have to set that culture and just
Right.
align to our mission, our culture, and
Right.
just keep going forward, even though it looks different than other people's. Like, you just have to be so sold on,
Mhm.
oh, this is how we want our lifestyle to be because this is what's going to help us get to this specific future that we are painting for ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's okay that it doesn't look like anyone else's. It's okay that people might disagree with us. And that requires a lot of resilience, a
Mhm.
lot of commitment, and a lot of mindfulness. And we just weren't taught that growing up.
Right. And it's exhausting. I mean, I think,
Totally.
what came to mind in what you're sharing too is there's still such a massive stigma around taking care of your mental health. I mean, my own parents, my extended family, it's almost like the elephant in the room. It's like, oh, that person's going through a tough time. My parents would call it like situational depression, or like it's temporary, that goes away. Well, hello, like our mental health and well-being is on a continuum. And that's
Yep.
something that has to be managed every day, and we have to really think about how our daily lives and our work and our purpose, if that's what we're working on, how that intersects and what our capacity is to make sure our mental health does thrive, and we continue to be the best versions of ourselves. But I find that I don't even to this day really have conversations around mental health with my parents because I know that my growth is just on a different level, and they have so much unacknowledged and unprocessed of their own 70 plus years that it's we don't have to go there. They're evolving on their path, and that's okay. But the sort of arrival that our generation is at is feeling like, why are we feeling shame around taking care of our mental well-being? Like, I think for listeners today, like, I'm with you. I'm doing it. I'm a coach and I also subscribe to therapy. I read a lot. I'm in this path.
Yeah, definitely. It's a never ending journey, but it does get better. And you do start to notice, like, oh, last year, this time, I would have freaked out over this. Or
Mhm.
last year, this time, I would have just said yes to everything. And oh my gosh, I feel so much more content how I'm doing it today than I was before. And I think we do have to embrace that continuous improvement type of mentality for this and not look externally for that validation that you're doing something right. It really is internal validation. Like, how do I feel? Do I feel good about my decision? Is this going to create more peace in me? That's all you need.
Right.
And that is so backwards from what we were taught. So that
Mhm.
makes it really challenging. I love that you had that story where you're like, yeah, I just don't talk about it much with my parents anymore because I had a friend recently go through a breakup and he was coming to me and I was saying, yeah, you're having this awakening about your emotions and how avoidant you were. And he's like, I just want to talk to my parents because I know that this has to do with how I was raised. I just want to talk about it with them and whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, be careful about the purpose that you're going into this conversation for. Because if you go into it like, it could sound like blaming, but they were doing their
Mm.
best, right?
Right.
They themselves are not as aware or awakened to this part of us. So you might not get what you want out of it. So be really clear about why you're entering the conversation. And he jumped
Right.
right into it and he came out of it saying, yeah, I don't think they get it. I'm like, yeah, and they don't have to, right? They don't
Right.
have to. We don't have to
Right.
force others to change. We're all on our own paths. If this is your path and you keep going, talk to other people who are further along or
Right.
right there with you and learning alongside you and just do that, right? Continue having those relationships with them, but it doesn't have to be on the level that you force it to be because that makes things
Absolutely.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think too, what you're highlighting around, I really believe that healing happens in connection, and it has to be with the people that are your cheerleaders and people that understand the context in which you're talking about things and your growth and all of that. Some people will go to the grave never wanting to acknowledge the things that have happened, and that's their path, and that's okay because that's their trajectory. But if you're looking to change the legacy and generation of your family, you have that power. And I have felt that internal healing, like as I heal as a mom, I am healing these other parts of my life that didn't really happen because I'm changing the mapping for my daughters. There were elements during my postpartum that I started to really take care of myself in a different way. And I saw my mom like take small steps for herself, wasn't really talked about or exchanged. But when you do heal, you do turn the light on for other people to like, even if it's a small step, maybe at some point it won't happen, but
Absolutely. You're creating that example that other people can choose to do something with, right? It really does create a ripple effect. We don't always have to force change. We have to do is just, that popular quotation from Mother Teresa, be the change you want to see. And those who are ready to step
mhm,
into that and be inspired by that change and needing that change, they will take their necessary actions. It doesn't always have to be this like full on conversation. It could just be changes in their own quiet time where you don't even know what's
right,
going on.
right. And I always think it's sometimes it's like one little nugget that you share with somebody, one little piece that the light bulb goes off or they feel inspired or you just feel validated. Like I think all of this work that we're doing too is you want to feel seen and heard, that you're not experiencing your maternal mental health on your own, or the struggles in your marriage or all of these challenges. Most of this stuff everybody is doing behind closed doors, and some people don't feel comfortable sharing, and that's okay. But to know that every little bit helps, that you're improving yourself and your partnership and your family unit.
Yeah, any moment you can be intentional in your life is a good moment to
Mhm.
have. Definitely.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into the whole transition of becoming a mom and also just adding more children, right? Because every time you add a child, it's like you become this different version of yourself. It's almost like you go through a different metamorphosis and you become this different or the next version of you,
Mhm.
right? So, how has your mental health gotten better or worse or just changed after becoming a mom of one, of two, of three?
Yep. So this is great because I feel like it's a chapter in itself for each child.
Hmm.
With my first, everything sort of lit on fire. It was almost like just like a volcano of trying to figure it out. But I remember with my second, because she was premature, it really was like this. My middle child's name is Zoe, and it means life. And I really feel like her name and that journey path of having her 5 weeks early really just flipped the switch on like, I need to get this right. Not knowing I was going to have a third child, but get it right on how am I going to craft my lifestyle and my well being path to really set the stage for the next years ahead, because I knew that what I was doing formerly was not serving me. And I sort of felt shackled to my job. I felt shackled to benefits. I was stuck in the story that this was the only way. And I think what's challenging about that is when you're married and you live in sort of like, oh, we need to stay in the comfort, cozy place of just not changing anything. It's very hard to make changes when you have small kids. And I was laid off in the beginning of the pandemic, and it was like this entry point for me to make a switch in my life. And then during the past couple of years, I ended up going on to have my business, have a third child. And I feel like everything from there went back to that piece you were mentioning with how am I intentionally building my work and my life to support me and my family. And that's been the golden focus for me. And it might not be the map that works for everybody, but that was sort of the changes and the iterations I had to make as I grew my family. I just couldn't subscribe anymore to full-time work, full-time burnout. There had to be some middle point that felt good to me. and felt like I could still create an impact. I could still be the mom that I wanted to be, have also work and purpose and all of that. But that formula was messy for a few years. I mean, that's why I started to do this work, the messy middle of life and career. It wasn't like, oh, in a day, it was like, okay, let's turn it around. It was a thoughtful, mindful process of crafting it with intention.
Yeah, yeah. I think our stories are so, so similar. I understand the struggle, and I was not being intentional at all. So it's almost like was experiencing those things to force me to be more intentional about how I am choosing to design life with my husband. Because at that point, like, we were fighting so much,
Yeah.
and we never fought like that before. And we were just like, the typical experience. It's like, okay, well, let's just talk about the kids and oh, you're pissing me off, so I'm not going to talk to you. And you're not really connecting,
Right.
right? And even now, we still are having to find like ways to continue to bring us back together because it's so easy to get taken out of your relationship to focus on life,
Right.
on work, on kids, on the house, on other people. And I think that all has to do with not having that example. So
Right.
it is tough to be like, okay, well, I don't know how to do this, but I know that needs to be done. So I'm going to flounder my way through it.
Right, right. And I don't think anyone nearly talks about like exactly what you've pointed out. I called it sort of the hamster wheel and the rat
Hmm.
race of not to that, a lot of working families, even if it's like not shouted out. I mean, it's in a lot of moms groups that I'm in,
Yeah.
hanging on by a thread and not being able to like work with your partner on how can we reimagine this. It's going to hurt a little because you really have to look at your finances, look at the jobs, look at like the whole thing, but it's probably going to hurt more if you stay in that really challenging, messy period where there's no space and there's no ability to work through issues. Because I think that what full time working dual income families are tasked with is there is no space. And
Hmm.
so it's putting out fires all the time and not really wanting to swallow the pill of like, maybe something needs to shift a little, whether it's career or schedules or whatever it might be. Some parents choose opposite schedules. And that also probably presents hard because they're like the ship sailing in the night.
Yep.
But I feel like what I'm also highlighting is like, our parents couldn't have dreamed this up because it was just suck it up, both work full time or whatever it might be. This is what we've been delivered,
Yes.
American dream. Your productivity, you are what you work, you are what you produce. And this is what we all went through. This is what my colleagues went through. My parents just kind of passed down, but I couldn't stay with that story. I just thought that there had to be a better way. And I think probably like you, your kids will tell you in their facial expressions, in their constitution, that things are going well when you're thriving. And I notice it. My kids are happy. The hot button's off. So I know that we are finding a formula that works for us.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you do have to have that level of courage to not be like, oh, I'm expected to do these things. I should be doing things. Things should look like this way. I
Mhm.
think as soon as you take that word out of your vocabulary, you will start to check in with yourself about what do I actually want to do and remove that conditioning of making it look good, right? Let's remove the idea that our life has to be Pinterest worthy or Instagram worthy and think about our lives feeling good, right? I always bring up this example of like, okay, your family photos, right? Like everyone, not everyone, but most people take family photos for the holidays or just to have to track the growth of the kids, right? What if instead of just looking good, you also focused on feeling good? Can you
Mm,
feel as good as you're projecting your family to look in these photos?
right.
That's the end goal. Like the goal of success is not how much money can I have? How much stuff can I have, right? How good can my life look? It's about how good can my life feel? Brings in that sense of individuality back into the equation of like, okay, well, feeling good for me can look like living in a cottage in the forest. Feeling good to someone else can look like living on their own island, whatever.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the same, but does it
Right.
feel good to you? Because this is your life, right? Like, screw everybody else's perception of how you should be living your life. As long as it feels good to you and it's sustainable and you're actually feeling like this is something I can do forever and your family life is going well, that's all that matters.
Right, right. And we're always evolving. There's all these like different phases of like your children's lives. And
Yep.
as parents, we're evolving with those different phases. And I think what you pointed out, I also share with my community is like really dialing into that feeling because it's so important. Like we have one go around and understanding that if you're living in a constant stress cycle and feeling like you're burning the candle from both ends, I would imagine if you really tapped into it, you know that you're not doing well because physical symptoms are coming up, different things are starting to break down. But it is that courage piece, rejecting some of what society wants us to do. And there's going to be a different formula in the next 10 to 15, 20 years because not only our generation, but the younger generation is flipping it upside down as well. And so I think it's just that individual piece, like you're saying, whatever works for you and your family. And that's where you begin. You really have to drown out a lot of noise that's out there.
You do. So let's talk more about like how this impacts us as individuals, us mothers, right? Self-care is such a phrase that gets thrown out there, and depending on who you ask, you will get different answers on what self-care means to them, right? You've got the people who are like, oh, getting my hair, getting my nails, getting a massage done. And then you've got people on the other spectrum. It's like, oh, it's having boundaries, it's
Hmm.
reflecting, it's meditating, it's taking a walk, it's saying no to things, right? So, how has your perspective on mental health affected your concept of self care after you became a mom?
Yeah, I think I kind of go back to this. It's kind of funny because it still comes up from time to time. Like, when you're really burned out and you actually want like 4 hours of time to yourself, but it's going to be like not even a fraction of a half hour or an hour that you're trading off on the weekends. So, this is where I call like the stockpiling of well being, where somewhere along my path, I think it was probably between my second and third child, like I realized that it's about the incremental self care or well being, however we put it, on a regular basis that is going to be the squirreling away or the stockpiling. So, when everything falls house of cards in my house, everybody's sick. I have a bit of a reserve because I've been doing this work all along. And that's been the magic middle for me. People view taking care of themselves and self care all differently. But I view it as long as I'm doing this a couple times a week or once in my day, a little bit goes a long way. And that's been my pathway. Sure, if I go a couple weeks and I'm not doing it, I feel it. My mental health starts to go down and things get really weird for me, just in my balance. So I've learned that even 20 minutes a day, as long as I'm not forgetting about myself, it just helps. And I think that so many of us are so booked in our schedules that we think we have to go somewhere or have it be some magical thing for it to feel good. And as long as you have one or two options of where you can go in your day, like whether that's like a meditation or journaling or a walk, then your mind can do it and you can just move on.
Yeah, because when you're in a constant state of stress, you're not going to have that space to be intentional. You're not going to have all that stuff that you're pushing down come up so that you can make decisions that are best for you. Like, my belief is self care is really a lifestyle choice. Like, you have to
Mhm.
intentionally be aware of, how do I feel? What do I want? Advocate for yourself, share
Mhm.
with your family, share with your loved ones so that they are in the know. Because if you keep it in, that's when the blowups happen. That's when
Right.
you're, having these expectations of how come people don't think about me. Well, if you're not even voicing it, they're not going to think about it because they're thinking about themselves. We're all thinking about ourselves, right? What
Right.
if they don't have the capacity to be like, oh, I wonder how mommy's doing? I wonder how my wife's doing, right? Everybody is dealing with their own stuff. And
Mhm.
so the least you can do is advocate for yourself, empower yourself to have that lifestyle, that routine, the day to day stuff go a little bit more your way in a way that meets your stuff. Like, what's your bandwidth? What's your capacity? Something
Right.
that in our family we've been doing is like on the weekends, sometimes we have a whole bunch of options of things to do. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
but what do we have the bandwidth for? Where are we all at right now? Right?
Mhm.
Are we just exhausted from the week? Okay, let's do something more chill. And if
Right.
something comes up that doesn't meet that, we're going to say no because
Right.
we're not going to do things because we're expected to. We're going to do
Right.
things because we want to. And those who love us will honor that because no one wants to feel like they were forced into doing something, right? And they don't want you there if you don't actually want to be there and you're just like showing up. So
Right.
I think we need to honor that part. And that is how we show up as our best selves.
Totally. And I think that the little bit goes a long way, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are still lots of women and listeners out there that still struggle with this. Because even for myself, after years of trying to figure out the formula, you know, my model was give everything to the kids.
Mm.
From my parents did this till you're empty. Like it was just that was what was modeled. And so there really wasn't that reflection, I don't believe, from my mom of saying, oh, what could I do for myself today to like take care a little bit so then I can be the best version? It was the opposite. It was, how do you give everything of your emotional, physical, all this energy? And I think that was also modeled of many their counterparts in families because you want to do the best that you can, and that's how it appeared, and that's what being a good mother was modeled. But I do feel like for today it's meeting in the middle. It's a little bit of yourself, it's a little bit for your kids, it's a little bit for your marriage, and you have to water all of those.
Yeah. And in some seasons, some of those can use less water and more of the
Mhm.
focus needs to be on other things. So it is kind of like a juggling act, keeping your pulse on different things. And that's where like the little tiny micro moments that you make an investment in during your day helps, right? It's not about like, okay, let's just only focus on this and only focus on that. It is more like, okay, what will help me feel like I'm connected to my kids? What's one small action I can take? Because
Mhm.
when we take intentional action that is for the purpose of connecting, that will do so much more than you just being there, right? Like you
Right.
just physically being there. When you're not emotionally, energetically, mentally in it, it's like, okay, you're there, but you're not really there. Like my parents were there, but like, did I feel it?
Right.
Probably not,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and
And
that
we
and
have
that's
to
like a
know.
that's a piece too of just trying to get yourself to a place where you're feeling connected. And I think that is also work of just being on the path of meeting your own needs and
Yeah.
being able to express what your needs are to your partner or for just in general. I think that having support along the way is also so important because sometimes if you're just in your own mind and in your own thoughts, it's not necessarily that easy to do it.
Yeah, no, I, for one, was so unaware of my own needs, and I was a horrible communicator, which is why I do what I do today, because I had to go through such a struggle to be able to know how to do that and practice it. And I very much fumbled my way through, but
Mhm.
I can say that's probably the most meaningful thing that I've done for myself that has really helped the trajectory of my life go into the positive direction rather than continuously feel disappointed, upset, frustrated, burnt out, even uncared for. We have to know what we need and what we feel to let other people in. And I think this whole idea of mental health and understanding ourselves is definitely something that we all need to experience and grow in to be able to have the types of relationships that we want, whether it's with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends, with your family. That core piece of building your own foundation and amplifying it out in healthy ways, that's where it has to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're really shining that piece of the best version of you, because
Yes.
you're really working all of those pieces. You're expressing yourself, you're meeting your needs, you're connecting with your partner, and things start to fall into place. Like, I think that when we're in harried and stressful places, we don't see how many things are on fire. And it does take a lot of intentional work, but I do feel like this is a generational mapping of, you can pass down to your kids better ways for them to feel good about themselves, how to express themselves, how to find balance in their life, how to take care of themselves with difficult emotions. I mean, there's just so much dense work here.
Yeah, definitely. And while it does sound challenging if you're new to this, it does get easier with practice. It becomes your way of doing things. Those questions
Hmm.
that pop up into your head to be intentional naturally come up with practice and consistency. So it's not always this like huge mental effort. It's
Right.
really just about changing the way you approach life, right?
Hmm.
And so if it feels hard for you right now, keep going. Start focusing on the positives that are coming out from your efforts and just focus on that. Okay, cool. I didn't blow up today, or I took longer to blow up, or I am having less breakdowns. Whatever it is, notice your wins and
Yeah,
cling on to them because that's really what
definitely.
helped carry me through.
Yeah, and I think it's like you hit the nail on the head. It's like things are a choice, and like having that intention and then just working in those small steps. You're kind of wrapping your arms around a focus. Like, we're all going to have different things that we're working on, but those small steps, it becomes habit after you are like, this is what I'm focusing on. If it's boundaries or just 20 minutes a day taking care of myself, whatever it might be, you'll get there. It's a windy road at times.
Yeah, and you deserve it. You
Mhm.
absolutely deserve it because when you feel good, you get to do good, right? But let's
Yeah.
focus on us. Let's stop. I think like, we had it backwards in the previous generation. It's like, okay, well, you do good. And then when you have that space, then
Yeah.
you can take care of yourself. And it's like, no, we have to help ourselves
Right.
fill our cup and give from our overflow instead of taking our cup and emptying it into someone else's, right? Pour into yourself so much that you just have like endless amounts of love and connection
Yeah.
and patience to give to other people. But when you pour from your own cup, you're just,
Right.
no, right? Let's take the
Yeah.
airplane example. Put your mask on first,
Yeah. And we're
then you can
like, you're
help others.
reverse engineering it, and then I think that people end up with new ideas, with new support, with really being their most present selves because they have more to give. That was such a lovely way to tie this conversation up. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can talk to you about this forever because it's such a deep
Yeah.
topic that we're both passionate about helping others with and even just using it in our lives. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah. So my website is christineanastasia.com. I'm also on all the different social media channels. I give tips on my Instagram page, which is Village Coach Mama, and really thoroughly enjoyed today. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. How can people work with you?
Yep. So I offer one on one coaching for clients, and I also give workshops to organizations either virtually or in person. I am located in the Massachusetts area, but you can feel free to reach out to me by email or through any of my social channels.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so before we wrap this up, I love to ask all my guests a question so they can help the listeners learn more about them. So, what is your favorite thing to do for self care since we're on the topic?
Let's see. I have a few that I do, but honestly, like, as simple as it is, I enjoy walking and just being able to be in nature. We have different trails that are near where I live, and just taking like 20 to 30 minutes just to sort of like clear my mind. I always have some nice ideas. Sometimes I do listen to a podcast when I'm walking, or I just let the surroundings be around me. But I found that there's like just such simplicity in being able to just walk.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and
Yeah,
for
thank you.
sharing your tips and perspective on how moms can start to really turn things around for themselves, because I think we all need that, even if it's just a reminder, if it's something brand new, right? So if you love what you heard from Christine, please go follow her, go say hello, tell her you met her through this show. And if you want to work with her, she's a wonderful resource to support you through motherhood and all the busyness. It doesn't have to feel like that all the time. There is an option out there that could feel really, really good for you, and she can help you find that. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'll catch you all
Well,
back here next week. Bye.
bye.
That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. I would so appreciate that. And if you love what I share here, then you're going to love and want to join my free private Facebook community that's also called Marriage and Motherhood. I hope to see and connect with you in there. Otherwise, I'll catch you back here next week for the next episode. Bye.